Well, a half century later, the adoptionist position in early Christianity reached its zenith under the teachings of Arius. Arius had been born around 250 CE in Libya, was ordained into the priesthood, and became a presbyter at Alexandria, Egypt. His adoptionist teachings were often uncannily in line with later Islamic teachings on the nature of Jesus and on the nature of God. For example, Arius taught that God is absolutely unique and incomparable, is alone self-existent, unchangeable, and infinite, and must be understood in terms of his absolute oneness. Now, given this all-important first premise, Arius concluded that, 1, the life of Jesus, as portrayed in the biblical Gospels, demonstrates that Jesus was not self-existent, that he changed and grew over time, if in no other way than in passing through the stages of birth, childhood, adolescence, and adulthood, and that he was finite, having a definite time of conception and birth. Therefore, 2, Jesus was God's created being who was called into existence out of nothingness, who could not have shared in the absolute uniqueness, immutability, and infinity of the Godhead without compromising them, who could not have been of the same substance of God without compromising the oneness of God, and who could have had no direct knowledge of God other than that which God chose to reveal to him. Well, Arianism was first publicized about 323 in Arius's poetic work Thalia, and quickly grew in popularity, spreading throughout the Middle East with amazing rapidity, thanks in part to the many songs that popularized Arianism amongst the Christian laity. It was due to the rapid rise of Arianism that the Synod at Alexandria met in September of 323 and formally excommunicated Arius. Well, this excommunication was promptly reversed 1 month later at the Synod of Bithynia. Finally, Emperor Constantine was forced to convene the Council of Nicaea in May of 325 CE. And at that council, they formalized a doctrine that Jesus was of one substance with the Father. Arius refused to sign this creed and was thence branded as a heretic. However, the Arian position within Christianity was so strong that Constantine was forced to reinstate Arius at the Synod of Jerusalem in 335. Later that same year, Arius died at Constantinople. However, that was hardly the end of Arianism within early Christianity. Quite simply, despite the verdict of the Council of Nicaea, Arianism was probably the dominant Christology within 4th century Christianity. Many bishops had refused to attend the Council of Nicaea, and many others recanted their vote at Nicaea once they were safely back home, removed from Constantine's force of arms. As an example, one can turn to Eusebius of Nicomedia, who was successively the bishop of Berytus and Nicomedia. Eusebius vehemently rejected the doctrine that Jesus and God were of the same substance and led the Arian opposition at the Council of Nicaea before being forced to sign off on the creed under force of arms. Safely back home, he renewed his alliance with Arius and was then exiled to Gaul by Constantine. However, even in exile, Eusebius continued to lead the Arian charge until his death around the year 342. However, the Council of Nicaea didn't solve anything. In response to the continued growth of Arianism, despite the Council of Nicaea, the Council of Antioch in the year 341 released a new creed that omitted any mention of Jesus and God being of the same substance. Furthermore, the Council of Sirmium in 357 actually endorsed the Arian position and stated that Jesus was unlike the Father or God. Only in 381 CE, at the Second Council of Constantinople, was the Arian position finally laid to rest and repudiated by the ecclesiastical structure of the Church with the issuance of the so-called Nicene Creed. And by the way, I'm going to digress for a moment. This is a mistake almost all Muslims make and most Christians make. They think the Nicene Creed that's said in worship service on Sunday morning was issued by the Council of Nicaea in 325. It was not. It was issued by the Second Council of Constantinople in the year 381. Well, notwithstanding this ecclesiastical dismissal of Arianism at the Second Council of Constantinople, Arianism continued to flourish in many Christian areas and was a potent force within some Germanic tribes until the end of the 7th century. Even today, Arianism continues to be influential in the Unitarian movement and among the Jehovah's Witnesses. Well, by the late 4th century CE, adoptionism is still being represented by the Ebionites, the Paulicians of Armenia, and the Arians. However, the 5th century saw yet another adoptionist movement gain widespread support. Nestorius was born late in the 4th century at Maris, Turkey. He studied under Theodore, the bishop of Mopsuestia, entered the monastery at St. Euphrates, was ordained a priest, and became a celebrated thinker and theologian. In 428 CE, he became the bishop and patriarch of Constantinople, arguably the second highest position in all of Christianity, second only to the Pope. And the Greek Orthodox Church would say equal with the Pope. Well, on Christmas in 428, Nestorius began a series of sermons that were to rock Christendom. Among other things, Nestorius argued that the Virgin Mary should no longer continue to be called Theotokos. Literally translated, that means God-bearer, but it's usually translated as Mother of God. Nestorius maintained that the use of that title compromised the full humanity of Jesus, whom he appeared to see as a man who had been adopted by God. At the Council of Ephesus in 431, Nestorius' teachings were condemned and he was deposed from his episcopacy. He later died around 451 in Panopolis, Egypt. But despite his death, the adoptionist teachings of Nestorius continued to grow in influence, giving rise to Nestorian Christianity. As such, the Council of Chalcedon in 451 CE had once again to condemn Nestorius and his teachings. However, this condemnation did little good in suppressing the Nestorian position, because in February of 486 CE, Barsamas, the Metropolitan of Nisibis, named Theodore of Mopsuestia, who was the chief Nestorian theologian, as the guardian of the right faith of the Persian Church, which was independent of Rome. Theodore was confirmed in this position by the Patriarch of the Persian Church, and the Persian Church became officially Nestorian. Preaching a doctrine that presents Jesus as a God-inspired prophet rather than as an incarnation of God, Nestorian Christianity continued to grow and flourish well into the 6th century. In fact, by the end of the 5th century, there were 7 metropolitan provinces in Persia and several episcopacies in Arabia and India. During the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, Nestorian Christianity continued to flourish in China. To this day, there are small pockets of Nestorian Christians to be found in Iraq, Syria, and Iran, although they appear to have lost touch with their Nestorian roots.